Hello all, this is Brandon with the Fellowship of Universal Truth, Yogic Ministries. And today I want to talk about a big resistance that a lot of people may have to yoga or the philosophy of yoga, let me be specific, or religion in general, or some of the claims that, you may hear in some of my teachings, which are not mine, by the way. I mean, they're ages and ages old. So I'm going to try and break some of that down a little bit. Yoga is pretty much the background where a lot of religions come from as far as the understandings. However, yoga is not a religion. Yoga doesn't discredit any religion. You can have any faith. You've got a lot of freedom and free will with yoga. But the yogic process, especially if you follow Patanjali's 8 limbs, it gives a step-by-step guide, essentially, to developing in the human system the ways to stay on point towards spiritual evolution. Also, the way to avoid pitfalls, and the way to, as well, develop the nervous system and the brain patterns. It's actually a science. Every religion, if they taught yoga, what would happen is their followers would start to become like the creators of the religions, like the prophets. They would start to have that type of understanding. A lot of religions have kicked the processes out, even though they originally started. All that being said, the big resistance that a lot of people have towards these, especially if you think of the name of my yogic ministry, Fellowship of Universal Truth, when you start saying that in a lot of the spirituality realms, especially, spirituality that has went away from religion, when you start saying those words, a lot of people, they start getting triggered, and they start saying things like, well, your truth, because they feel judged. There's no judgment. It's a science. So that's why it's universal truth. If you follow the path, if you follow the steps, if you put in daily work in your mindfulness, breath work, meditation, yoga, things of these natures, yoga as in the asanas, yoga as in the philosophy, if you put in this daily work, it leads to certain results. Those certain results is the absence of fear. Fear goes away. Developing the ability to gain God's grace, source's grace, however you define it, that's okay. The ability to learn how to surrender. You develop compassion, you develop patience, you develop all of the wonderful toolbox things you would love to have in an emotional toolbox to deal with difficult situations in life, if you follow that process. If you don't, then it's really, really hard for the human system to do so, especially today's day and age where we're putting on more and more and more. Resistance to any of this type of teaching, especially before you've experienced it. That's the other thing with yoga. Yoga doesn't ask anyone to believe anything. They ask you to try and experience it. When you experience it, it teaches itself. Yes, there are gurus in yoga lineages and things like that. I don't consider myself, the title guru. I consider myself like a lighthouse, a way shower. I don't think I'm better than anybody. That's not the way it is. What it is, though, is I have learned through experience, through my experiences, through my studies, through my life. I've learned these things to be true. I've learned certain truths. And so therefore, I organize this group to share this wonderful abundance of knowledge in a very accessible way. Because a lot of people, they steer away from it, or they think it's something odd, it's not for them, they can't do that. No, you can. You don't have to come from a certain lineage. This is for the entire world, and it always has been. So that's why I've been motivated to go into this area. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit more on that, because I know the judgment factor can be really strong. So I'll explain something. Those that aren't doing these practices, you have a bigger proponency towards fear. If you haven't transcended the attachment of your body and your mind, if you still think you're your body and your mind, you still will have fear. If you have fear, you don't have faith. It doesn't matter the religion you have. If you have fear, you don't have faith. Those two things can't sit in the same. And if you do, that's okay. Like the yin and yang symbol in Eastern philosophy, there has to be balance, right? So there's got to be happy people, blissful people that have it understood. And there's got to be people suffering, which are learning. I like to consider suffering as learning. There's no good or bad. And that's the tricky thing for a lot of people to transcend again, if you don't have a yogic path process. But when you think of that, we need this balance, right? That's also a good tool to not get angry at somebody. On top of developing your nervous system so you can have the patience and the compassion with it. But also, when you really think of it on a deep level, they're holding the space on the other side. They're holding that anger, And yes, it doesn't feel good in them, but they're holding it. And thank you. Thank you for holding that. That way I don't have to. I can be blissful because that balance is held on a different end of the spectrum. Now with that, the reason why it's a little bit different when we start talking about, also like associations and things like that, and it can seem like there's judgments. There's really just discernment happening, but it can seem like there's judgments, right? I'm going to explain. Other animals, which are other births, we've been animals in our previous lifetime, we've been bugs, we've been all the way down to one-cell organisms, right? And with this, cat, for instance, a cat is a cat is a cat. They're on the same evolutionary playing field, right? Then you have like a squirrel, an ant, same evolutionary playing field. They don't have free will, right? They don't have a developed nervous system, okay? Humans, totally different situation. We have free will, and we have a highly complex nervous system, and then we have several factors that go into the chemical makeup of the brain, etc., on how well and how apt we are to use that. As well as, because we have such a highly developed nervous system and brain programming, we have a lot of programming from our past experiences that we need to learn how to transcend in order to break free from the programming, which is the connection of the mind and body, and how we connect to that. Our upbringings, our previous understandings, the things that have happened in this life that we attach to, all of these things create programming, right? That programming, it takes away your free will. And so therefore we have humans that are at many different stages of evolution of consciousness, okay? So some people, maybe that are, constantly in a suffering mode, they're making others suffer, etc. They're doing, what would consider to be negative things, right? They're holding up that balance. So we can thank them for that. That doesn't mean we condone the actions, but we can understand that their existence, right? And I like to think of them like if we're all this one body, which is source, right? Think of it like in the human body, for instance. So I like to think of that individual as like a toe. No, not because the toe's dirty or anything like that. In some analogy, those individuals, a lot of times that are acting that way, they do feel like they're stepped on often and things like that. So you could think of that. But the toes help the body keep balance, right? As you evolve, as you develop your consciousness, which is a choice, right? But that still makes all of us humans looking the same, but we're at different evolutionary periods, okay? Different ages, different yugas. So when you think of it on that scale, so they holding that space is the toe, which keeps balance. That's a good thing, right? It's not a bad thing. It's needed. Now, if they want to stop being a toe, they can decide to evolve, but they have to follow a certain step to do so, all right? Spiritual in general folks that are just baseline spirituality 101, not following a process. A lot of times they fall in lines in a lot of religions. A lot of the negative things that have happened due to religions come from them escalating to a point where they think they're the hands. Okay? Now, what do I mean by that? Hands without consciousness or without the mind are dangerous. Now, sometimes the hands can do great things, and the hands have a lot of pride in that, right? But if the hands are just left to their own, they can be doing something good, but causing harm, right? Because they can be doing it too much, okay? So that's where we get that spiritual ego involved in there, all right? You get the spiritual ego, environmentalism, right? That's one example. Now, environmentalism, it's a great cause. But if you're worried about what others are doing and you're attached to what others are doing, that's going to develop anger. It's going to develop divisiveness, bitterness, separation, all of these feelings. It's going to develop an attachment to this anger of why are they doing, what's this going on, right? So then you can start to try and control their movements, which will build more karma, which will keep you in the attached cycle, keep that divisiveness going on, us versus them. A lot of religions do this, right? With yoga, we try and escalate that a little bit further. With this scientific approach to the human system, we try and be the consciousness of this body. And when you operate that, it's literally just a message of that universal creator, that message of creative intelligence, right? And so when you're operating like that, then you have a different understanding, a really big bird's eye view of the whole system. So then when you're like, hey, if we do this, this, and this in the human system daily, it develops a consistency, and then we get these results. That's not out of judgment. It's not out of a position of ego. That's out of tried, tested, true from the collective consciousness. These things work. So I hope that this message reaches each and every one of you and you understand more about the mission of, the Fellowship of Universal Truth Yogic Ministries, as well as, a lot of the messages that, I put out both through the ministries as well as in my personal life, my personal business as well. I hope that this breaks down a lot of those initial feelings of being judged. No one is judged. We just choose our experience and choose our level of evolution. And everyone is needed no matter what level they're at. All right? Thank you so much. Namaskaram, everyone.